A heavy cloud of silence descended over the crowd as thousands of citizens of Dijon present in the arena held their breath. They watched in shock as the bulky executioner swung his double-edged sword towards the neck of a visibly terrified young girl. It was obvious to everyone witnessing this event that she had resigned herself to fate. A small pool of blood was already starting to collect on the stony steps as she bled out of a deep cut from her left shoulder. The calm in the arena was immediately replaced by an eruption of angry hisses and curses as people realized in horror that the executioner had missed his mark once again, and this time, the blade had glanced off a knot of hair from the back of her head and cut about 2.5 centimeters deep into her neck. The young girl who was about to be executed was Helene Gillet, and it was quite difficult for most of those observing this in the crowd to understand how an innocent-looking girl could have ended up in this predicament. You might also be wondering the same. Well, these were the series of events that led to this day. This is the untold story of Helene Gillet. Helene was the beautiful 21-year-old daughter of Pierre Gillet, a prominent royal chatelain or castle keeper of Bourg-en-Bresse, which was a small town in the ancient province of Bresse, France. Her father, Pierre, was the first magistrate in the town, and by all accounts, a wildly successful man of great repute. Being the only daughter of Pierre, her childhood was steeped in luxury, from the ornate tapestries that adorned the walls of their family's chateau to the exotic fruits and pastries that filled their tables. She was taught by private tutors, learning music, languages, and the art of conversation, as was expected of a girl of her standing. She also had minimal contact with the outside world and had little to no friends growing up. The only form of interaction she had beyond her family revolved around the house staff. So it was not surprising when she developed a strong affection for her brother's handsome tutor. Now the town of Bourg-en-Bresse was a very small one, where everyone knew each other's business and secrets were hardly kept. Therefore, it didn't take long before rumors of Helene's love affair with her brother's teacher would begin to circulate around town. One day, on October 1624, a soldier on patrol made a shocking discovery in the woods on Pierre's property. He noticed a crow pecking at a bit of cloth and decided to investigate further. On closer inspection, he observed the tiny body of an infant wrapped in a sheet. This sheet was made out of an expensive material and bore the letters HG on its hem. The sheet also had the monogram of the Gillett family stamped on it. At that time, it was very common for wealthy families to have unique monograms associated with the family name. These monograms were often added as an embroidery on their clothing and was usually seen as a symbol of importance or great affluence. Following this discovery, the soldier immediately raised an alarm.
Help! Help!
To no one's surprise, Helene Gillet was arrested and charged with the crime of infanticide, which is the intentional killing of an infant. Helene would stand trial for this accusation, and while on trial she gave an account that went contrary to the prevailing rumors of her love affair. She stated that while she had been friends with her brother's teacher, it was not of a sexual nature. However, one evening her brother's teacher lured her to a room, forced himself on her, and raped her. As a result of the shame and fear of being publicly ridiculed, she decided to keep the incident to herself, and also maintained the same silence even after she became pregnant from the encounter. Unfortunately, the tutor was nowhere to be found, and as such could not corroborate or deny her claims. The account of what happened next seems a bit muddy, but Helene insisted she was innocent with regards to the final fate of the infant. She stated that the infant had passed away from natural causes immediately after delivery, and she played no role in the infant's demise. Helene was examined by matrons, who determined that she had given birth recently. This finding, in addition to the evidence discovered by the soldier and the already pervasive rumors of her alleged promiscuity, sealed her fate. On February 6, 1625, she was found guilty of concealed pregnancy and infanticide. This guilty verdict was based on a law passed in 1585 that mandated that any woman who concealed a pregnancy or claimed to have delivered a stillbirth in the absence of witnesses be considered guilty of that child's murder. Thanks to her highly placed status in the society, she was sentenced to death by beheading, which was regarded as a more noble form of public execution, and usually reserved for the ruling class in the society. Following her sentencing, Helene was ostracized in the town and publicly disowned by her father. He prohibited any interventions on her behalf and clearly stated that he wasn't interested in using his influence to manipulate the decisions of the court. She was also abandoned by the rest of her relatives with the exception of her mother. Due to the very sensitive nature and overall magnitude of this case, her mother was able to secure a retrial of the case in the Parliament of Dijon, which was a neighboring city where the Parliament resided. Prior to the hearing at the Parliament, Helene's mother visited the convent of Bernardin in Dijon, where she prayed for a favorable outcome on behalf of her daughter. A thorough hearing was conducted by the Parliament on May 11, 1625, which was about 3 months following her initial sentencing. Her case was fiercely debated amongst members of the Parliament, and unfortunately the decisions of the magistrates in Bourg-en-Bresse regarding her public execution was upheld. The next day, May 12, 1625, Helene was conveyed to the hill of Morimont, where the execution was slated to take place. She was transported in a horse-drawn cart by the chief executioner of Dijon, Simon Grandjean. In the cart also sat Madame Grandjean, the executioner's wife, and a priest whose duty was to give Helene some words of comfort. The cart was also flanked on both sides by some town guards. Their duty was to protect the cart from being attacked by the bystanders. The site for execution was called Montfaucon, and it comprised of a quadrangular platform raised over 6 feet high, with multiple gallows for hanging those condemned by the law, flanking the 3 sides. The 4th side of the quadrangle was reserved for beheading and had only a wooden block where the condemned laid his or her head. The block was carved from the stump of a very large tree, and its smooth surface was interrupted by deep blood-stained grooves in the middle. The grooves on the chopping block served as proof of its judicious use. On arrival at Morimont, Helene was taken out of the cart and up the flight of stone stairs onto the platform. All of Dijon was present to witness this execution as the news surrounding the entire trial had spread like wildfire. By this time, she had also gained a lot of sympathy due to her young age. People thought the guilty verdict was really harsh, especially considering her own account of the situation. Helene was assisted by Madame Grandjean, the executioner's wife, who positioned her properly on the block, while the executioner stepped forward with his sword. Simon Grandjean had been the executioner of Dijon for a while now, and his job either involved conducting the hanging or beheading of those sentenced to death according to their sentences. With his trusty double-edged sword, he had swiftly dispatched justice countless times with a single swing. This time was not going to be any different. Standing to the right of Helene, who was already kneeling with her neck on the block, he raised the sword and waited for the signal to strike. Immediately the signal to proceed was issued. He swung downwards and hit her left shoulder instead, inflicting a deep cut. It is uncertain how a seasoned executioner could have missed his aim. While some accounts attributes this miss to his poor health, as he had been dealing with an ailment for some time, others state that he probably missed because he was unnerved by the idea of beheading a very young, innocent-looking girl. Following the miss, Helene fell from her position and tried to crawl away from the block, only to be restrained by the executioner's wife. The executioner at this point became distressed, as he covered his eyes, afraid to look at the mess he made, while the visibly angry crowd hurled abuses and stones towards him. He was then admonished by his wife, who encouraged him to remain strong and complete the task at hand. With determination in his eyes, he picked up the sword and planted his feet firmly as he went for a second attempt. A heavy cloud of silence descended over the crowd as the citizens of Dijon present in the execution arena held their breath while he swung his double-edged sword towards the neck of the visibly terrified Helene, who was in obvious pain at this moment. The calm in the arena was immediately replaced by an eruption of angry hisses and curses as people realized in horror that the executioner had missed his mark once again. The rage coursing through the crowd was indescribable. They had seen enough. Sticks and stones were hurled towards the platform as the crowd surged forward in a fit of anger. Sensing the murderous intent of the crowd, Simon fled for his life and hid himself in a vault beneath the platform. Meanwhile, back on the platform, Madame Grandjean, the executioner's wife, tried to re-establish her authority and take charge of the situation. She believed that if she was able to complete the execution, the raging crowd would be pacified. Already, in addition to the stones being thrown in her direction, a section of the crowd had broken through the barricades and were angrily making their way up the platform. Seizing the already weakened Helene by the throat, she began strangling her. However, the blood trickling over her neck made it quite difficult to get a firm grip. When she realized that her attempt at strangulation was futile, she pushed Helene down and reached into her pocket for a large pair of scissors. Using this scissors, she began to viciously attack Helene, stabbing her multiple times in her face and throat. She was immediately interrupted and restrained by the angry mob, which by this time had made it to the platform. The mob pounced on Madame Grandjean and unleashed their anger on her with sticks and stones. She was repeatedly clubbed and stabbed until she died. Having tasted blood, the enraged crowd yelled for more and stormed the vault underneath the platform. There, the executioner, Simon Grandjean, was fished out of his hiding place and beaten to death. When the mob was done with the lynching of both the executioner and his wife, a great shout went up from the crowd, "Save the patient! Save the patient!" A few persons would lift Helene up in a makeshift stretcher and take her down the platform. As the exhausted and battered Helen was being transported to the nearby local surgeon, she then uttered the statement,
"I knew God will come to my aid,"
before passing out from the immense pain and exhaustion. Even though it may come as a surprise, the fate that had befallen both the executioner and his wife was not an unusual occurrence. It was not uncommon for the crowd present during a beheading to go crazy if the executioner fails to deliver a swift death to the condemned. As a matter of fact, the hangman of Florence had also been stoned to death by an enraged mob after a badly botched execution in 1503. Helene, on the other hand, made a tremendous recovery. She had her wounds tended to and was nursed back to strength. However, her fate was still uncertain. She was condemned to die by law after all, but for the time being, Dijon did not have a replacement for the executioner who had been killed. As a result, the sentence was suspended, pending the arrival of a new executioner. Helene's supporters seized this opportunity to send a petition and appeal to Louis XIII, the King of France. The appeals of the people reached the king, and on 5th of June 1625, during the marriage of his sister Henrietta Maria to Charles I of England, he annulled Helene's trial and death sentence. Helene was granted a royal pardon and became free once again. While this is up for debate, some accounts state that after Helene gained her freedom, she retired to the same convent of Bernardine in Dijon, where she would live out the rest of her life. And other accounts states that Helene would die 3 years later following a medical malpractice. Whatever the outcome was, it is undeniable that Helene did indeed survive the executioner's blade twice.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then you'll surely be interested to learn about another true life story of a man who did the unthinkable by successfully selling a bridge to his victims. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to get notifications as soon as new uploads are made. Please do not forget to also like and share. Thanks.